Dawn rolled slowly across the camp, a thin ribbon of pale gold cutting through the winter fog that clung to the barracks like a second skin. It was January 1944, deep in the Assam foothills of British India, where bamboo fences creaked in the cold wind and a lone guard tower stood silhouetted against the rising sun. The bell for roll call echoed across the yard, clang, clang, and the Japanese POWs stepped out barefoot onto the frost-bitten earth, their breath rising in trembling clouds. From the kitchen hut, steam drifted upward, carrying the unfamiliar smell of barley porridge. A British sergeant scribbled numbers on his clipboard, while Gurkha guards watched silently, rifles resting against their chests. Inside the medical hut, something even stranger waited. British nurses, women the POWs had been told were morally corrupt, cruel, and barbaric, were preparing bandages, bowls of warm water, and salves. They spoke in soft voices, the kind these men had not heard since leaving home. The flap of the tent rustled as the first wounded POW stepped inside, limping, trembling. He bowed his head, expecting pain, punishment, humiliation. Instead, he felt a gentle hand on his shoulder. He whispered, barely audible, "Why? Why are you being kind to me?" The journey that brought these Japanese POWs into the British medical ward had already reshaped everything they thought they understood about war. After several days of travel through monsoon-drenched rail lines and military checkpoints, the train finally stopped at a small Assam station surrounded by dense forest. British soldiers ordered the prisoners to step down, but the tone was not harsh. It was firm, almost procedural. The prisoners kept waiting for the blows that never came. From the station to the camp, the march was slow. The Japanese walked with heads lowered, embarrassed to be seen by civilians. To their confusion, local villagers neither mocked nor cursed them. One child even waved at them in innocent curiosity, and a few prisoners quickened their pace, unable to process the gesture. These moments, small, quiet, unremarkable to the British, felt like emotional earthquakes to men who believed enemies would treat them worse than beasts. When they reached the camp, the gates swung open, not with the clatter of violence, but with the routine calm of a place following rules. The barracks were simple bamboo huts. A perimeter of barbed wire enclosed the grounds, but there were no snarling dogs, no chains, no soldiers shouting threats. Instead, a British lieutenant explained through an interpreter that they would receive food, medical examination, and rest. Some prisoners stared blankly, unable to believe they had heard correctly. Others clenched their fists, ashamed that kindness felt more painful than cruelty. That first night, many could not sleep. They whispered among themselves about what the British intended. Some suspected a trap. Others feared that gentle behavior was meant to lure them into lowering their guard before punishment. One older sergeant insisted, "This is deception. They want us to forget we are prisoners." Yet even he could not ignore that the guards offered extra blankets when temperatures dropped after sundown. By morning, fog draped the camp like a cold, wet curtain. The smell of steamed barley porridge drifted from the kitchen, a scent so different from the rice they knew that it made several prisoners nauseous. But hunger overcame resistance. Guards distributed tin bowls. A few men hesitated, then ate with trembling hands. The warmth of the food stung their stomachs like fire. They had been starving for weeks. After roll call, they were taken in small groups to the medical hut. The moment they saw women inside, British nurses in khaki dresses, veils secured neatly under their caps, many froze in place. Their culture had not prepared them for this. Being wounded was already a mark of dishonor. Being treated by a woman from an enemy nation was almost unbearable. Their commanders had drilled into them that foreign women were immoral, dangerous, capable of humiliation. Yet the nurses simply gathered basins of warm water, unwrapped clean gauze, and spoke softly to one another as they prepared stations. A young private named Fujimori stepped forward first, pushed gently by a guard who recognized he could not walk without help. His leg was swollen twice its normal size, skin purple and split from infection. When he reached the table, his whole body shook. Not from fever. He was terrified. He bowed repeatedly, face lowered, murmuring apologies in Japanese, unsure how to behave in the presence of a woman who would soon touch his wounds. The nurse, a woman in her mid-20s, with tired eyes but steady hands, dipped a cloth into warm water and began cleaning the edges of the wound. Fujimori flinched, expecting the sting of violence. Instead, the cloth moved gently, slowly, almost tenderly. He lifted his head, eyes wide in disbelief. The other prisoners watched in stunned silence. None of them had expected the British to expend medical supplies on them. Supplies were precious. Medicines were rationed. Yet here they were, receiving treatment equal to wounded Allied soldiers. The nurses did not wrinkle their noses at the smell of infection. They did not insult them. They simply worked. The sound of cloth dipping into water, the quiet tearing of bandage rolls, and the soft murmurs of nurses discussing temperatures and pulse readings became the unexpected soundtrack of their new reality. Some prisoners tried to refuse treatment out of shame. A corporal named Ishida insisted he needed none, even though his arm was swollen and feverish. The nurse assigned to him simply said, "If you do not let us clean this, you may lose the arm." Her tone was not threatening, just factual. Ishida finally extended his arm, but turned his face away, unable to watch. When she wrapped fresh gauze around his wound, he whispered, "You should not touch me. I am your enemy." She shook her head and answered, "Right now, you're a patient. That's all." For the nurses, this was duty. For the prisoners, it was a rupture in everything their world had taught them. They had been told the British were monsters, yet here they were, receiving care with a gentleness they had forgotten existed. Later that evening, as they returned to their barracks with clean bandages and small packets of medicine, many sat on their bamboo mats in silence. No one knew how to speak about what had happened in the medical hut. The kindness unsettled them more than captivity itself. And somewhere, deep within that shock, the first cracks in their old beliefs began to form. The shock began with food, something so simple, yet so emotionally disarming that many prisoners didn't know whether to eat or cry. On the second morning, the cooks served lentil stew and chapati-like flatbread, a common wartime ration in British Indian camps. The Japanese prisoners stared at it as if it were an alien offering. Their own rations in the jungle had been handfuls of moldy rice, dried fish flakes, or nothing at all for days. Here, the portions were small by British standards, but enormous to men who had survived on starvation. Some hesitated, fearful the food might be laced with humiliation. Too soft, too foreign, too generous. One private whispered, "Why would they feed us so much? Why waste it on us?" Another, after tasting a spoonful, froze, overwhelmed by the warmth sliding down his throat. His eyes watered, not from spice, but from memory. Of miso soup at home. Of warmth he thought he would never feel again. Hygiene brought another shock. In the medical tent, British nurses insisted on washing wounds with warm water, applying antiseptic ointments, and trimming away dead skin. Japanese soldiers had been taught that pain was proof of discipline. Gentle care felt like a dishonor. Some begged the nurses not to trouble themselves. Others apologized repeatedly for the state of their bodies,